Hi, you're watching Hindustan Times, and I'm Aditi Prasad, and with me is the paper's editor, Sukumar Ranganathan. Today, we're going to be unpacking the Union Cabinet's telecom package and how it can perhaps rescue the ailing sector. Now, the centre, for those who are still not in the know, the centre has just announced a huge package, a slew of financial relaxations for the telecom sector, including sectoral liberalization and procedural sorting out procedural anomalies. But they've also, not just that, they've also done a dramatic reversal of their long-held stance about the adjusted gross revenue, or AGRs as they are called, which had been, which had really taken the telecom sector downhill for the longest time. They were really, really roiled by that particular clause, and the centre has dramatically reversed it. But Sukumar, today when we're talking about it, I'd rather start with for the consumer, because let's look at the viewers. We all know what is going to bring to the telecom sector, but how does it make a difference to the lives of you and me as people who are mobile subscribers, who are consumers? How does it change my life?
There are two ways of looking at it, right? And I'm glad you started with consumers. Because telecom is one of these strange sectors, and not just in India, but elsewhere in the world, but more so in India than anywhere else in the world, where the consumers have always had it good, right? But the companies have not.
Right.
So it's a strange economic situation where the consumer is happy. Sure, service quality dips from time to time, and part of the reason why it dips is because the cost base, the cost structure is so low. But consumers have pretty much had it good. For the longest possible time, and everyone knows this, the cheapest data was, the most inexpensive data was available in India. Now, of course, it's gone up a little bit, but it's still very, very low when you compare it to the cost of data anywhere else in the world, especially the first world. If you try to get a data package when you're traveling, not that anyone is traveling now, but when you're traveling in the US or the UK or anywhere in Europe, you'll just realize how fortunate we have it, how fortunate we are. And what has really happened is telecommunications, is especially mobile telephony, is a hugely multiplicative sector when it comes to the economy. So let's just step back, and most people need to understand a few things. And the first thing we have to understand is telecom policy liberalization in India has always happened in fits and starts. It's always happened in the most ad hoc manner. It doesn't seem to have followed any rational method. So let me give you an example. So initially, we had separate licenses for fixed and mobile. And then the mobile guys obviously paid more than the fixed guys. Then suddenly they said, no, if you're fixed, you can offer one kind of mobile service. And you will remember that the CDMA platform came up. And then they said, okay, great, we are making it technology neutral, so it doesn't really matter. Even if you have a CDMA license, you can't have technology-based licenses, but we did for some time. You can offer GSM services. And then they said, oh, it's all right, even if you have a broadband license, you can offer internet telephony, you can offer normal telephony. So, it just a lot of ad hoc changes. And the unfortunate thing about many of these ad hoc changes was that it disadvantaged the incumbents. So the telecom people, the telcos, the telecommunications operators who were there, they suffered. In the middle of all this, you had the big 2G scandal, right? Which again roiled the sector and pushed a lot of people out. So there's been a lot of churn. There's been a huge aggressive competitor who came in, which was Reliance. Actually had a broadband license, but then was, thanks to a lot of regulatory changes, was able to actually offer mobile telephony on the basis of that at really low pricing.
And changed the industry.
Some people call it predatory pricing, but it doesn't really fall under the definition of predatory pricing, because you can do predatory pricing if you are the market leader. If you're a new entrant, it's not really predatory pricing. So the consumers have had it great. So I have two phones. I have an Airtel connection which I've had for the longest time, and I have a Jio connection on which I pay a pittance, but the service is good, the data is cheap. So the rates have really gone down. But because of the ad hoc policy making which disadvantaged the incumbents, and because of an adverse court ruling on the matter of adjusted gross revenue, which you mentioned, and again, we must remember that it wasn't the courts, right? It was initially the government which said, we will define revenue as adjusted gross revenue. And again, I know this is going to be laborious because the answer is dragging on. But in 1999, the telecom sector was in very bad shape.
Right.
After 5 years of mobile telephony, it was going nowhere. So the government effected a transfer from a license fee regime to a revenue sharing one. And when they did that, they said a certain share of revenue will have to be paid to the government. And that revenue is defined by the AGR. The unfortunate thing is the government's definition of AGR
also included the non-telecom businesses.
It even included things like dividend.
Correct.
Right? Dividend income which companies earn. So clearly, and that was what the case was about. And by the time the case came to fruition, there were just 3 telecom companies left standing in India, right? There was Jio, there's Airtel, and there is and there's Vodafone Idea. And it ended up that Vodafone Idea had to shell out the most, and Airtel the second most. I mean, after all the payments they've made, I think Vodafone Idea still owes around 50,000 crore. Right. Bharti Airtel owns around 26,000 crores. And those payments had to be made. Now, suddenly, if you have to make that kind of payment, it clearly creates a huge problem for the companies. So that is the immediate crisis which the policy announcements that were announced earlier this week seem to have addressed, but to some extent.
Okay. When you say to some extent, you can possibly talk about what are still the challenges ahead, maybe a little later. But a direct question that I have stemming from what you just said is that there are 3 players in the market, right? So there was a very clear, with Vodafone Idea almost on the verge of bankruptcy because of these AGR dues that they had to pay. Does this, from the consumer's standpoint, if Vodafone Idea had gone out of the market, you would have had a duopoly, right? And that's really not good for any market, because market forces then don't play that big a role.
Not at all.
And the consumer would have been shortchanged at the end of it in the long run or in the middle
Exactly.
run. Right? So how does this, the aversion of this bankruptcy, does this deal avert that bankruptcy? Can we still hope for a three-player market?
I think so, because it's not just the fact that they've got a moratorium on AGR. If you look at the specifics, during the moratorium, you'll have to pay interest, but you can pay the interest through equity. At the end of this 4-year moratorium, the government can choose to take the dues and whatever dues are remaining and say, okay, great, we can convert that into equity. So that is definitely a plus. And the fact that you've been given a moratorium also means that your cash flow position improves. The second thing that's happened is one of the significant shareholders in Vodafone Idea is Vodafone. And because a few weeks back, the government said, settled pretty much the retrospective tax case with them. I mean, it's still not settled, but a very positive move has happened. The legislation itself has been scrapped. And they're trying to settle it with companies like Vodafone and Kane, which had huge outstanding dues according to the Indian Tax Department. And where arbitration outside the country had actually, arbitral tribunals had ruled in favor of Kane and Vodafone. So I think that helped Vodafone to some extent. Now this helps Vodafone Idea, in which Vodafone is one of the shareholders, the Aditya Birla Group is another shareholder. And clearly, I don't think right now you're going to have a situation where this company is going to go out of business. The other thing is all these companies had to pay spectrum charges.
Right.
Now that can also be bundled with the AGR, and there's a moratorium on that.
Right.
So you have more money. which you can invest in technology, which you can invest in service.
Bettering your service,
Bettering
because
your,
some of the
exactly,
services
for
are
some of
really-
them, the service had really deteriorated. The other thing that happens is the spectrum regime has been liberalized. I mean, the sharing of spectrum, which was previously constrained by a certain charge that you had to pay, has been
Right.
knocked off. So, you know, it encourages people to share spectrum, which is something that I think you're going to be seeing more of. So I think this means...
Does that mean more competition in the sector?
I don't think you're going to see new entrants, but what it means is these three companies will continue to be there. Obviously, there was no doubt over the other two, but now Vodafone Idea is going to continue to remain in the sector, will continue to compete with the others. There will be more interesting services that are launched. Because we are all speaking about 5G, and at some point in time, that will also happen.
What are the challenges you still see? Because you did say that, you know, it solves some problems. There are still other
some
problems to be
extent,
resolved.
correct.
What are those other problems which you think are still to be resolved?
The first one is at a very macro level. Like I mentioned, one reason why we are here is because of a series of missteps in policy that have happened over the last 20 years. And so I think we need to become much smarter and much more transparent with our policy making in this sector. We need to get much smarter with how we allocate spectrum. Because I know an auction is the best way of discovering price.
The right
It's the
price,
most
yeah.
transparent way of discovering price. And the memories of the 2G controversy are still too fresh in our mind for us to say, oh, you know, but the thing is, an auction also tends to inflate costs, right? And I think it's good for the government in terms of maximizing revenue. But in the telecom sector, maximizing revenue will always have to be a second priority. Initial priority for India was really teledensity. At the turn of the millennium, 1999, India's teledensity was in the high single digits. In January this year, it was 87, 88%.
Right.
So you look at that stride that India has made, and that's clearly benefited a
Millions.
lot
Absolutely.
of people. One of the things that was expected among these series of policy announcements that were made was a floor price below which you could not charge, which the government seems to have not, I mean, they've just avoided that. They should start seriously thinking in terms of that, because that will again introduce some level of health in the sector, right? I know that in airlines you have price caps, and right now you have price caps in airlines. So, which is also, I mean, so in a sector like telecom, there is no harm in the government actually intervening and setting a floor price, because I think it would introduce some semblance of sanity into the sector. See, people of a certain economic background and people for whom who can afford it and who realize the importance of data, those who work from home, children are studying from home perhaps, things like that, don't mind paying a little more just to ensure that it is stable, just to ensure that the quality is good and everything else. But a lot of other people will not. India is a very, very price sensitive market. And clearly companies can take advantage of that and undercut the competition. I know it's a free market, but I don't think we should ever get into a situation where the companies are going out of business because someone is indulging in quasi-predatory pricing, which will come back to bite the market in the long term, because like you said,
become a monopoly or a duopoly.
and then, you know, the companies can say like, okay, now our prices are going to go up, right? Or take it or leave it kind of thing. So those are probably things that we need to watch for. And as we start making more policies, because this is a dynamic, evolving sector, I think we need to learn from these missteps in policy making over the last 20 years and come at very, very clear and transparent policies. You can't have a sector where the consumers are happy, where the government's own revenues are maximized, but the companies are doing badly, right? I mean, there's a fundamental paradox in that. So you need to reach some sort of equilibrium. I know that in telecom, it's very difficult to find that level of equilibrium, but it can be done.
Okay.
Aviation, it's equally difficult to find that level of equilibrium, but it can be done. But I think that's what policy should aim for.